What? Yo, wait a minute. Wait,
Do you know what the number one job of somebody that sold their soul in Hollywood is?
What?
Is to act like it didn't happen. They all do the same job.
What? Wait a minute. You really heard that audio? Because the moment that clip resurfaced, the internet didn't just react, it exploded. And now one voice is adding fuel to the fire, Katt Williams, and he's suggesting there's way more behind the scenes than people realize. And let's be clear, this isn't just another gossip cycle. This is one of those situations where a leaked recording, years of industry rumors, and resurfacing old relationships are all colliding at the same time. Now people are asking one question over and over again. Was that audio just internet noise, or was it a glimpse into something that was never meant to be public? Because according to the online chatter, what people heard might not even be the full picture. Some believe it was misunderstood. Others think it was taken completely out of context. And then there are those who believe it's part of a much larger story that's slowly unraveling in front of the public. And now, with Katt Williams stepping into the conversation, everything feels different. Because whenever he speaks on industry situations, people don't just ignore it, they start connecting dots. So the real question is simple. Are we watching a misunderstanding go viral? Or are we watching a story slowly start to reveal itself in real time? Either way, this situation is far from over. And that's exactly where things start getting complicated. Because once a clip like this hits the internet, it stops being just a clip. It becomes a narrative. And once a narrative forms, everyone starts trying to fill in the blanks with their own version of what they think happened. That's what's happening right now around the resurfaced Meek Mill audio conversation and the way people online are reacting to it. The conversation has shifted from "what is this?" to "what does this mean?" And those are two completely different things. Now, in the middle of all this, you've got voices like Katt Williams being pulled into the discussion, not because he's directly involved in the situation, but because people associate him with calling out industry patterns and behind-the-scenes dynamics in general. And that's where the internet does what it always does. It connects unrelated dots. Old interviews get resurfaced. Old statements get re-edited into new clips. And suddenly, everything feels like it's part of one massive hidden storyline, even when there's no verified link between them. But the audience doesn't always care about verification in moments like this. They care about interpretation. They care about meaning. And most importantly, they care about the feeling that something bigger is going on. That feeling is what drives the entire cycle. Because once people believe there's more beneath the surface, every detail starts to look suspicious. Every past clip starts to feel important. And every silence starts to feel intentional. That's how online narratives escalate. Now, let's talk about why this specific situation keeps resurfacing in waves. It's not just because of one audio clip. It's because of timing. Every time something related to industry controversy or major public figures trends, older conversations get pulled back into circulation. Algorithms don't distinguish between new evidence and old speculation. They just amplify engagement. So a clip that might be years old suddenly feels new again. And when that happens, people who never saw it before react like it just dropped. That creates a fresh cycle of confusion, reaction, and reinterpretation. Now add commentary culture into that mix, YouTubers, streamers, podcast discussions, and suddenly the same 30-second clip is being analyzed from 50 different angles. Some people treat it like entertainment. Some treat it like investigation. And some treat it like proof of something bigger. But here's the key thing that often gets lost in all of this. No matter how many times something is discussed online, repetition does not equal confirmation. It just equals attention. Still, attention is powerful enough to reshape public perception. And that's why this conversation feels so intense right now. Because once a narrative reaches a certain level of circulation, it stops needing new information to survive. It starts feeding on itself. Every reaction creates another reaction. Every breakdown creates another theory. And every theory creates another debate. Now, within that environment, figures like Meek Mill get placed at the center of conversations whether they directly address it or not. And that's another important part of modern internet culture. Silence is rarely interpreted as silence anymore. It gets interpreted as something else entirely. Avoidance. Strategy. or confirmation, depending on who you ask. So now you've got multiple groups of people all looking at the same situation and seeing completely different stories. One group thinks it's exaggerated internet speculation. Another group thinks it's part of a larger industry pattern. And another group just sees it as online chaos feeding itself again. But all three groups are reacting to the same source material. That's what makes it so difficult to separate fact from narrative once something reaches this level of virality. Because the story no longer belongs to the original moment. It belongs to the internet. And once that happens, control over interpretation is basically gone. Now, one of the reasons people keep bringing up Katt Williams in discussions like this is because of how he talks about the entertainment industry in general, not because he's validating any specific claim, but because he often speaks in a way that encourages people to question how things operate behind the scenes. And when audiences are already in a questioning mindset, they naturally start linking unrelated topics together. That's how speculation ecosystems form online. One statement leads to another interpretation. One interpretation leads to a theory. And a theory eventually gets treated like a storyline. But even in the middle of all this speculation, there's still a real-world layer that often gets ignored, the human layer. Because behind every clip, every rumor, and every viral moment, there are real people who have to deal with the consequences of how information spreads. And the internet doesn't slow down for that. It moves forward, constantly, turning every new wave of attention into content. Now, at this point in the discussion, the story has essentially split into two parallel realities online. In one version, it's just internet misunderstanding amplified by repetition. In the other version, it's part of a deeper narrative that people believe is slowly being uncovered over time. And neither side is willing to fully step back. That's why conversations like this don't resolve quickly. They evolve. They stretch. They repeat. And they resurface whenever attention returns. And that brings us back to the core issue. Once something becomes viral enough, the truth is no longer the only thing shaping perception. Engagement plays a role. Timing plays a role. And audience belief plays a major role. So even without new evidence, the story continues to circulate because people are still trying to make sense of it. And as long as that continues, this topic isn't going anywhere. It will keep resurfacing, keep being re-edited, keep being reinterpreted, until the next wave of content pushes it back into the spotlight again. And that's exactly where the internet takes over again. Because once a story reaches this stage, where multiple interpretations already exist, the next wave isn't about clarity anymore. It's about reinforcement. People don't come back to the conversation looking for answers. They come back looking for confirmation of what they already believe. And that's what keeps this entire discussion around Meek Mill and the resurfaced audio conversation alive in cycles. Every few weeks, a clip pops up. Every few months, a discussion reignites. And every time it does, the tone becomes more intense than before, even if no new verified information has actually been added. Now, what makes this situation even more complicated is how commentary culture has evolved. In the past, rumors stayed in forums or small communities. Today, they're amplified through short-form clips, reaction videos, and algorithm-driven feeds that prioritize engagement over accuracy. So what happens is simple. A clip resurfaces, people react, creators break it down, audiences reinterpret it, and suddenly it feels like a new development, even when nothing new has actually happened. And in the middle of this cycle, personalities like Katt Williams get pulled into the conversation again, not because they are central to the situation, but because they represent something audiences associate with speaking openly about the industry. That association alone is enough to keep their name attached to discussions far beyond the original context. But here's where things start shifting again. Because as narratives expand, they begin to detach from their original source entirely. At first, people were reacting to a specific audio clip. Then they started discussing the people allegedly involved. Then they started revisiting old relationships, past interviews, and historical interactions. And now, the conversation has become something much broader, almost like a floating theory ecosystem where every new piece of content gets absorbed into the same storyline. That's how internet narratives evolve. They don't stay linear. They expand sideways. Now, within that expansion, something important gets overlooked. The difference between evidence and interpretation. Evidence is fixed. Interpretation changes depending on who is viewing it. And in this case, most of what is circulating online falls into interpretation, not verified proof. But once interpretation becomes widespread enough, it starts feeling like fact to the audience consuming it. That's why repetition is so powerful in digital culture. The more something is said, the more believable it feels, even if nothing new has been proven. Now, another layer of this conversation is timing. Because people are not just reacting to the content itself, they're reacting to when it's resurfacing. Whenever public figures face unrelated controversies, old narratives around them tend to reappear simultaneously. That creates the illusion of connection, even when the events are unrelated. It's a pattern recognition effect. The human brain tries to link separate events into one understandable structure. And online, that instinct gets amplified massively. So suddenly, disconnected moments start feeling like chapters of the same story. But in reality, they may not be connected at all. Still, perception becomes reality in the digital space. And that's why narratives like this are so persistent. Now, let's talk about why silence plays such a major role in all of this. Because in online culture, silence is rarely interpreted neutrally. If someone doesn't respond, people assume it means something. If someone responds too strongly, people assume it means something else. And if someone responds inconsistently over time, that becomes its own narrative thread. So no matter what happens, interpretation continues. That's the loop. And in this loop, figures like Meek Mill become symbolic anchors, not just individuals, but reference points for larger discussions about the industry, relationships, and influence. But symbolism is dangerous in storytelling because it removes nuance. Once someone becomes a symbol, their real-life complexity gets flattened into a single idea. And at that point, the internet stops analyzing the person and starts analyzing the symbol. Now, one of the reasons these discussions keep gaining traction is because audiences today don't consume content passively anymore. They participate in it. They remix it. They argue with it. They build theories around it. And that means every viral moment becomes a collaborative storytelling event rather than a single narrative. So instead of one truth, you get hundreds of interpretations competing for attention. And whichever version spreads fastest becomes the dominant version in public perception. Not because it's verified, but because it's visible. And visibility is what the algorithm rewards. So over time, visibility replaces accuracy as the main driver of what people believe. That's the core shift happening in situations like this. Now, stepping back for a moment, what's actually happening here is not unique to this one situation. It's a broader reflection of how modern media ecosystems work. Old content gets resurfaced. New commentary gets layered on top. Audiences reinterpret everything through current context. And the cycle repeats indefinitely. Which means the story is never really finished, it just keeps updating itself. And every update feels like a continuation, even if nothing fundamentally new has been added. So when people ask whether there's more to the story, the answer online is always the same. There is always more, because interpretation never stops expanding. But whether that more is factual or just narrative layering is where the uncertainty begins. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people watching, discussing, and debating. Because clarity would end the conversation. But ambiguity keeps it alive. And in the attention economy, ambiguity is far more valuable than resolution. So as long as clips keep resurfacing, commentary keeps circulating, and audiences keep engaging, this entire discussion will continue evolving. Not into one answer, but into multiple competing versions of the same idea. And that's why stories like this don't end. They just change shape. And at the end of all this, the biggest question isn't really about the audio anymore. It's about how stories like this even grow into something this large in the first place. Because what started as a short clip online has now turned into a full-scale internet narrative involving interpretations, reactions, breakdowns, and theories that keep evolving every time the topic comes back into circulation. And in the middle of all that noise, Meek Mill becomes less of a focal point of the original moment and more of a symbol inside a much larger online discussion about fame, trust, and perception. But here's what people often forget in situations like this. Virality does not equal verification. Just because something is widely discussed does not mean it is widely confirmed. It just means it is widely circulated. And circulation is driven by attention, not truth. That's the key difference. Now, when voices like Katt Williams get brought into these conversations, it adds another layer of intensity, not because he is directly confirming anything, but because audiences associate him with challenging mainstream narratives. And that association alone is enough to reshape how people interpret unrelated topics. But what happens next is predictable. The more a topic gets discussed, the more it detaches from its original context. At first, people are reacting to a specific moment. Then they are reacting to interpretations of that moment. Then they are reacting to reactions. And eventually, the original content becomes secondary to the discourse around it. That is how modern internet storytelling works. It is not linear. It is recursive. It keeps looping back into itself. Now, the most important thing to understand in all of this is how easily perception can shift in a digital environment. Because online, information doesn't travel in a straight line. It spreads in fragments. Short clips, screenshots, quotes taken out of full context, reaction edits layered on top of reaction edits. And each layer adds a new emotional tone to the original material. So even if two people are looking at the same clip, they are often not seeing the same story. They're seeing two different interpretations of it. And that's where conflict starts. Not from the original moment, but from the way it is framed afterward. Now zoom out even further. What this situation really reveals is something bigger than any single person involved. It reveals how audiences today consume narrative itself. People are no longer just watching events unfold. They are actively building meaning around them in real time. Every comment section becomes a debate forum. Every clip becomes evidence in someone's theory. Every silence becomes a possible clue. And every old interview becomes a potential missing piece. But in reality, most of these pieces were never connected in the first place. They are being connected by interpretation. And interpretation is powerful, but it is not always accurate. That is why these kinds of viral cycles rarely reach a final conclusion. Because there is no central authority controlling the narrative. There is no single verified version being distributed. Instead, there are thousands of versions competing for attention. And whichever version spreads the fastest becomes the most visible one, not necessarily the most correct one. So where does that leave the audience? It leaves them in a space where entertainment and information overlap constantly. Where commentary sounds like investigation. Where speculation sounds like evidence. And where opinion can quickly be mistaken for fact if it is repeated enough times. That is the environment this entire conversation exists in. And that is why it keeps resurfacing. Not because new facts are always emerging, but because attention cycles keep restarting it. Now, stepping back from the noise, there is one final takeaway that stands out. The internet does not preserve truth in a clean form. It preserves versions of truth. Fragments of conversations. Clips. Without full context. Reactions without original intent. And over time, those fragments become their own ecosystem of meaning. So when people look at stories like this years later, they are not seeing the original moment anymore. They are seeing everything that was built around it. And that is why clarity becomes harder the longer something stays viral. Because layers keep adding up. And each layer changes how the previous one is understood. So in the end, this is not just about one audio clip. It is about how modern audiences process information. It is about how narratives evolve without a single author. And it is about how quickly perception can shift when millions of people participate in the same conversation at once. And maybe that is the real story here. Not what happened in the clip, but what happens after the clip enters the internet. Because after that point, it no longer belongs to the people in it. It belongs to the audience interpreting it. And once that happens, the story never really ends. It just keeps changing shape. Now I want to know where you stand on this. Do you think this whole Meek Mill audio situation is just internet speculation getting out of control? Or is there actually something deeper behind all the clips, theories, and resurfaced conversations? And what do you think about how quickly stories like this spread online, where one clip turns into a full narrative in hours? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one of those situations where everyone sees it differently. If you want more deep breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, because the next story might be even bigger than this one.